Lions Rock Productions.
This is Popping the Bubbl with hosts Sandra Ponce de Leon and Pete A. Turner.
Hi, my name's Amber Case, author of Calm Technology, and you're listening to Popping the Bubbl.
Hey, Amber, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, it's great to be here.
You are so accomplished. You're a researcher on human tech interfaces at MIT and Stanford. You're also currently on a book tour with regards to your Calm Technology book. You speak publicly around the world, and you're a cyborg anthropologist. So super fascinating to have you on. We've listened to your TED Talk. You also have been on TED. But tell us a little bit about your journey, about what got you here.
Kind of grew up in a technical family. Both my parents were broadcast engineers, so they helped put television on the air. And then my grandpa was the head of the mathematics department at University of Utah. Everybody was in either media or tech. So I grew up thinking that everyone's parents had labs and that everybody could solder. I think I learned to solder when the minute I had hand-eye coordination. My dad said, "Ooh, great, you can help me build like an artificial intelligence chip or like a synthesizer." I was like, "Great."
Oh my gosh, how cool.
And so I remember going to preschool and not having anything in common with any of the kids. Like I was talking about electronics and I was talking about, outdated information because we didn't have the internet yet, of course, but this is like the late 80s. But we had this 1960 World Book Encyclopedia, and I didn't really have too much more. I didn't really have a lot more information than that. Like we had an Atari computer, and I remember looking up the entry for the computer in the 1960 World Book Encyclopedia, and it was like the size of a gymnasium. It was enormous. And I said to my dad, I was like, "Well, what happened? Like, why do we have this tiny little computer, and why was this computer big?" And he said, "Well, technology changes over time. It's fundamentally unstable." And I said, "Oh, cool. So does that mean we'll get a computer that like will fit in our pockets in the future?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, probably." So we would always have these discussions over, breakfast or on Sundays about the future of technology. We'd do little bets. I'd be like, I would want like some more RAM for my computer, like later on when I was like 14 or whatever. And we'd do a bet. I'd be like, I bet the price of RAM will be like $100 for 32 megabytes or whatever by this date. And he'd be like, I bet it will be 150. And then if I won, he would buy me the RAM. So I got really good at predicting the prices of electronics.
Wow. Okay. So you were really excited by RAM.
My dad and I kind of had an arms race after a while. Once I got into high school, I was like, I have this many terabytes of hard drive space. And he's like, well, I have this many terabytes. And I was, doing all of these odd jobs, trying to make enough money to buy weird computer parts, because then we had LAN parties. So you had to have really good graphics cards to play games. And it was this big social group. And we would, just go to each other's houses. Eventually we hired out a room at like the local community college. And I think we had like 60 people there on computers playing games. It was pretty fun. But yeah, everybody was kind of trying to figure out, what can I do to make like a little bit of extra cash? I had my first job in the .com boom, actually. It was part of this youth program. It was for at-risk youth to basically learn how to make websites. So it was like 13 or 14. It was out of the mayor's office in Denver, Colorado. And I was going to a school that was basically an at-risk youth school. My demographic, my social class was not really that great. I remember going to some sort of summer math class that I convinced my parents to let me go to. And we got to use this software called Esri. It's this mapping software. And they're like, hey, you could type in your zip code and then see what kind of people are in your zip code. So I type in my zip code and it's like nobody in this area goes to college and like people don't make that much out of this neighborhood. And it was the first time where I said, oh no, I thought, the whole world of opportunity was going to be open to me. But according to my geography, like this isn't going to happen. What am I going to do? And so I started really obsessing on like just trying to get good at something and, trying to figure out, I need to go to an Ivy League school, like I need to get straight A's. And then the schools that I was going to at the time, they were really good in math and science and engineering. Like Lockheed Martin sponsored a program at our high school. And so I took all of those classes, so much so that like we all basically had not like job offers, but basically a verbal message that, hey, if you want to apply here, you have all the skills to get a job here now. Like we trained you in high school. The problem was that I loved math and science and engineering, but I wasn't very good at social interaction or looking people in the eye. I didn't really understand aesthetics. Like I wore super weird clothes. They all look like hipster clothes now, so it's imperative. I didn't really have friends. I was an only child, and my parents used to live in Salt Lake City, Utah, where my grandpa worked, because University of Utah was like the fourth node of ARPANET, like the first internet, and it connected both coasts together. It was this big deal. So he worked there working on all this cool stuff like vector graphics and things like that. But then my parents, they moved to like Denver, Colorado when I was 6 months old, had no social network there. So I kind of grew up alone or with older people. And so making friends was really, really tough. So I just threw myself into like writing comics and doing math and science. And then when I got a computer and I had that little tiny, job program that I was part of, like this internship program, I had like $6.50 an hour, and I got a student discount and got all this software like Photoshop and, Dreamweaver, horrible software. Started making websites, and I made my first website, which was like this big PHP forum. And I realized that like the shape of the forum really mattered. Like where the buttons were placed allowed people to interact with information differently. And so I would start to just change it. Like I didn't know what programming was. I just realized that you could edit lines of this thing called PHP, and then it would change the behavior of the site. And I'd look at all this documentation trying to do that. And then it got hacked, and then like the forum got really popular, and then there was even more hacks, and then there was spam. So I was like constantly fixing the site, not knowing that what I was doing was programming and security. And, I had no clue. I was just like, well, I have to make sure the site's up today because, everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people at the high school I was at, they wanted to use it at lunch. And they're like, the site's down, or like, can I have a feature request? And then there was too many feature requests. So I started making people administrators, and I was like, you're going to moderate this section, and then you're going to fix this thing. And so I started kind of, giving people positions, like if they had enough comments and they had contributed enough, and they took it all really seriously, and they were giving me reports all the time. And I thought, this is cool.
This was in high school?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
It was entertaining, and there were a lot of other people running competing forums. So it was, we were competing against each other to see how many users we could have and like the design. And then we were also hacking each other's things. So I remember like getting pranked really badly. Somebody sent me a fake Supreme Court summons for file sharing. Like it was like Supreme Court's like, we've detected that you file shared. And I was like, oh my gosh, do I need to burn my hard drive with thermite or whatever? It's like 2000 degrees. So it can like destroy any traces of information, even by forensic tools or something. And then it was just a prank, and they really got me. They got me on that one. And I was like, oh my gosh. And then I kind of laughed about it because it was really good. Because of course we were all file sharing at the time. Like,
is that what the forum was about? File sharing?
No.
Were there topics that you guys were talking about?
Yeah, the topics were awful. It was just like politics and art and music, all the cultural stuff. And then there were all sorts of hidden forums that were just like, elite speak. And it was typical stuff that you would do as a teenager. Yeah, but we didn't talk about file sharing because obviously it was illegal and we didn't want to get caught with that.
So basically you created a tech company while in high school. You developed an org chart, hired people, and developed this technology. You had a QA system, basically a social network going on.
Yeah, it was a social network. Yeah. And, nobody got paid, and I didn't either. It was $100 a year to support this thing. It was really cheap, and I had money from this job, like $6.50 an hour job that I'd had over the summer. So I had, enough funds for it, I guess. So, yeah, everybody, in my high school, not everybody, but this group of people, we were all making social networks. So it wasn't like it was exceptional. It was, keeping up with the Joneses. Like, you also need to know network security and, elementary Cisco routing skills. Everybody was like, I want a Cisco router. So we'd go to this place called Tattooing Computers then with this junkyard, and you'd get like a router for $20, and then you would network everybody's computers together. And so we just had to know it. Like you couldn't participate if you didn't know it, I guess. But I was definitely the odd one out. I mean, I was the girl and I dressed really weirdly, and people's parents were super confused by me. And they're like, we're going to have an overnight LAN party and you're going to be downstairs with like 20 guys. And I was like, yeah, because I'm a nerd and this is what we do. And they're like, okay. Successful. I was like, I have straight A's. Like you can talk to my parents. They were talking to my parents, and my parents were like, yeah, she's fine. She's just a nerd. Nothing's going to happen. And all the guys were incredibly respectful. Like everybody was really nice to each other. And we just wanted to play a lot of video games. So this is what we did. The problem was that when I went to school, I wanted to do more math and science, and I basically burnt myself out. And then I got a job at a computer repair shop in downtown Cheyenne, Wyoming, where we had moved to after my dad lost his job in the .com boom or bust. And so we were sitting there, and I remember my boss getting paid so much money, like $90,000, and I was getting paid again, like, $10 an hour or something. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, I'm doing work, and this guy is he's doing nothing. Why is he getting paid so much? And there was family stuff that was involved and all this other stuff. But I said, maybe I should go to college to find out, And so I asked around, and I knew somebody going to Lewis and Clark College in Portland, Oregon. And I took a Greyhound bus up from Cheyenne, Wyoming to Portland, Oregon, and visited in like 2004. Mm-hmm. And I called my mom's best friend. He was a mathematician. And she said, look, like, you can do all the math and science you want, but if the economy changes, or let's say Lockheed Martin lays off all their employees, you won't even know what's going on. Like, you won't understand the fundamental things about life. You should go get a liberal arts degree so you can learn how to think. Like, you need to know how to think because the world is going to get really weird. And if you know how to think, you'll be fine. But if you don't, you're just going to get laid off and be unemployed, and it'll be a mess. And I was like, oh my gosh, really? But I love math and science. It's so knowable. It's so convenient and consistent. And she said, yeah, well, good luck. So I call Lewis and Clark and I say, I know it's the middle of the year, but I have a really nice application package. You probably have money left over. Can you give me a scholarship? So they gave me enough that it was cheaper to go there than in state, which was great. It was crazy though, because I think my grandmother gave me enough money to buy books every semester. And one semester I bought a bike instead of books and got like C's and almost lost my scholarship.
Oh my gosh.
People at the school were from the upper class. I mean, I'd never encountered that before. I looked like trash. I had these kind of inner city accents that I had created so that I didn't get beat up. I had all this like weird slang. I swore every other word. I was articulate in super awkward ways. And it was just a total mess. And so I was pretty much rejected for a lot of college, except then I moved to an international dorm, which was nice because a lot of my parents' friends, the only ones I got to meet were from other countries. So I felt like, okay, I belong here. And I hung out with that group for a long time. And then I just took a random assortment of classes to start out just to see what was interesting. I took history and anthropology. I walked into the anthropology class and they were talking about like how you can understand people and their behavior, but not on an individual level, but how society affects behavior. Mm-hmm. And how tools affect behavior. And I said, oh my gosh, this is it. Like, this is what I need to study. I need to study people because I understand computers just fine. And I understand math and science, but people are really difficult for me. This is my major. And so I went and declared my major 5 days later. It's like, okay, this is it. This is what I'm doing. And then at the end of the year, I didn't really have a lot of money. So I was always looking for activities on campus so I could get free food. So I found
what a motivating driver, huh?
Oh, the amount of things I've learned because I wanted free food is just tough. So I was like, all right, it was a philosophy colloquia and it had free pizza. And I said, oh my gosh, pizza. So I run across campus trying to get there on time to get the free pizza. And I sit down and there's this woman named Deborah Heath, and she says, I'm going to talk to you about cyborg anthropology. It's a new subsection of the anthropology of science that deals with humans and technology and how our tools affect us and actor networks. And she's like, I'm one of 2 anthropologists assigned to study networks of information on the Human Genome Project. I said, what? Who are you? Okay, when are you speaking? She's like, at the end. So I had to sit through, what ended up being very interesting information to get to her lecture. And at the end, I said, well, what is this? And she says, well, I teach cyborg anthropology, but I teach it every other year, so you have to wait. And I'm like, well, that's it. That's what I want to be. It's a blend of technology and humans. And I didn't know then that there was a field of user experience design or that there was human-centered design or anything like that. And I just thought, oh my gosh, this is crucial, because if I want to make anything for people, going back to these forms that I made in high school, it was about the shape of the technology and the interactions that made it sticky, that made people want to be on it. Because I would fundamentally alter the structure of this site and it would change how people acted. So, oh my gosh, what is that? What does that mean? Why? And I would routinely use these awful products. And I thought, well, I'm young, I can deal with these products really easily. But as I get older and I want more of a routine, I'm not going to be able to handle all this new stuff. Like, what about things that mean something for a long time? Like, what is good design? So I took her class and I wrote my thesis on mobile phones, which was funny because it was 2007 and the iPhone had just come out. And I was trying to do a startup in college that was about electric cars. Like, we were like, we'll do a startup about electric cars, but electric cars probably won't be around until like 2016 where people really buy them. So we're just going to try. It was a total mess, but we got the school to fund us to go down to San Francisco, and I got to see all these people on iPhones, and I wrote my thesis about, what happens if you put your dog on hold because you have to write a text message. Like, I've never seen this before. These phones are stickier than before. This is amazing. And then out of college, I kind of took the concept of my thesis and actually made it into a startup, which was hilarious. And then all these people love this word cyborg anthropology, and they're like, can you give a talk on it? And I was like, okay, here you go. I did speech and debate in high school, and I did like all these communication classes and Toastmasters, and the adrenaline rush of speaking was super fun. So I started giving these little talks, and then I got an invite from TED in 2009. And wow. I said, is this a prank? Like, I haven't done anything. Why are you doing this? Like, this is embarrassing. Like, you must be joking. And they're like, no. So I had like 6 months to prepare a talk, and I wasn't very good at it. And they wouldn't let me tell anybody that I was doing it. And I talked to my job. I was doing this user experience work because somebody figured out, hey, you're a user experience designer. You hate if buttons are placed in the wrong place. You can get paid for putting buttons in the right place. This is amazing. So they kind of just, they said, okay, well, work on the speech. So I worked on it, and the night before I gave the speech the next morning, I had to talk to Chris Anderson of Wired Magazine, and I said, my speech isn't very good, but here it is. And he's like, yeah, you're right. It's awful. And
this was the night before.
This was the night before. And I was like, this is a relief to be told that it's awful, because I know it is, but you need to tell me why and how to fix it. And he's like, okay, well, just move it around. Say we're all cyborgs now, because that's obviously a super weird thing to say. And then say we're all human and natural, and end it with something, the opposite. And then you can, the middle. And I said, oh. So I went back to my hotel at like midnight because we were still doing rehearsals. I think it was like Sheryl Sandberg rehearsed her talk before mine, and like all these people like who would have these big ideas and books and successful careers out of this were going right before me rehearsing, and I was like one of the last people to rehearse. So I'm there at midnight redoing the talk. I rehearse it like 10 more times, have like 2 hours of sleep. I go up on stage in, a suit that I bought for the occasion that's super strange looking, and I give a talk, and I have to ignore the audience in front of me because I'm like, this is 2009. Like, this is going to be online for like 10 years. How do I make a talk that in 10 years people will still find relevant? And I don't know. So I had to pretend that the audience didn't exist right in front of me. And they told me that they edited the talks too, because I didn't think that they did. I thought everybody was perfect. And they're like, if you make a mistake, just stop and redo your entire sentence or paragraph if you want. And so I actually
Wow,
stopped.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah, well, they don't want to tell you that because then, it reduces some of the magic. And, people who are about to speak don't prepare as well if they know that they can just start over. So getting people to be panicked before is really good for, I think, I don't know if they do this on purpose, but they also send you a thing called the TED Commandments, which is like, thou shalt not abuse PowerPoint and like a lot of really scary things in stone on a tile. I got this mail like 2 months before the talk and I hid it in my sock drawer. I was like, I don't want to ever see this. This is terrifying.
I want to ask you about the cyborg anthropology part, because that's fascinating in terms of a concept. How do you ethically do that kind of a research? I mean, it seems in your talk you talk about how your front yard can be open, right? People can interact with your cyborg self. How do you deal with the ethical concerns of someone like that, like the AAA, who kind of oversees a lot of anthropological questions?
Yeah, this is a great question. I mean, one of the weird inconsistencies in research is that you do a formal research project and you have to get everybody's permission and tell them what's happening and, submit it through the review board and then get your permission. And then you've got a giant television show and they have people sign away their rights and they're doing all sorts of possibly irreversible psychological damage on the contestants, and yet they don't have to apply through any review board for it. I find it super bizarre that there's two things going on where it's like, well, can we allow that data in those shows to be used by social scientists? Because that could be interesting. Mm-hmm. Or can we make sure that people on these television shows have adequate psychological counseling if something goes really badly? And then the other thing is sometimes if you're trying to get permission for all these things to do proper research, you might miss out on that warm data or an entire weird zeitgeist of what's going on. And the other issue is that while a lot of this data is freely open and accessible, it's publicly posted on places like Twitter. So do you need to ask permission to use the data in research if, one, companies are already profiting and data mining all this information and selling that customer data and making money off of people, or places like Facebook are twisting around the news feed to make people more depressed so that they click on more ads so they get better click-through rates so that the line is good for their competitors. So it's kind of funny. It's like, well, here's this review board that talks about ethics and you can do a proper set of research, but in some cases you miss out on some of the critical assessments that that other companies are skipping steps and they're not being held accountable for it. So I think one of the problems is that you have people writing amazing work. Like, one of my favorites is, Dana Boyd's dissertation and a lot of her work on the migration of people from MySpace to Facebook when they come of college age and the class differences between Facebook and MySpace. And getting permission from people to do that and actually like involving yourself in that research, it's super important to do. Some of the problems with it is that it takes a lot longer. So by the time you get out, you're like, oh, my dissertation's on this. It's like, well, that social interface doesn't exist anymore. So now
that's a good question. I want to ask you about that because I think, and this will sound weird, but this is the best way to say this. Our ethics are changing. They're moving faster than maybe, an ethics review board can do. Like I worked in Afghanistan doing basically gonzo anthropology. And the AAA wouldn't like what we did, but it's a combat environment. You are not very permissible. You can't do the traditional things and be allowed to stay there. You can't take up the resources. So the ethics they're situation dependent. And I think we're talking about the same kind of thing here where, MySpace doesn't really exist anymore, or not in the same way. So you have this data that's already there. Is it unethical then to use something like that, or is it even ethical to go slow when the research will be overcome by events before you can even publish it?
Yeah, this is something that's really strange to me because on the one hand, like there are amazing things you can do with like data science, and you see like the OkCupid information. Is that ethical? Well, it's a social network and they say you've opted into sharing information with us and therefore we can use it. So that's, that's a free opt-in thing. So that's okay. And the data scientist showcases the information in a way that's consumable by a lot of people. And I do like that method as long as you have, I would really like to see anthropology papers in two sections. One where it shows all of the research and all of the data, all the behind the scenes, all the biases that could come through, and then a super human readable so that you can see it and it's visualized outside of the anthropological or whatever background you have, so that it's super digestible. My concern about a lot of industries, maybe not like material science where like, you want that super complexity and people in material science can read all these papers, but a lot of the information and a lot of that rigor that produces a paper gets lost or owned by, JSTOR or any of these pay-to-play, peer-reviewed journal places. And the idea is that, yeah, your stuff is peer-reviewed.
Hey everybody, Pete A. Turner, co-host of Popping the Bubbl. This episode is sponsored by us over here at Lions Rock Productions. What do? Content management strategy. We'll help you create podcasts, develop strategies, consult on what you've got. If you want to take a look at content, we would love to have an opportunity to do that for you. Now let's get back to Popping the Bubbl.
But when you see the peer reviewers who are like exhausted and they're reviewing something that's a year late, trying to publish something like I published something it took in this journal, it took a year and a half to get it through.
Wow. And stuff just moves so fast in today's day and age that it must be outdated by that point, right?
Yeah, let's say that you have an insight into something that could prevent like 50 or 50,000 people from dying. Let's say that Facebook gets hijacked in some way by, let's say, fake news. Mm-hmm. The fake news is done in a way that gets people in a depressive loop and they end up committing suicide. Can you prevent that from happening? You need to be able to publish something really fast, or you need to be able to communicate something really, really quickly. And then the opposite is there should also be research for and funding for research for incredibly long-term, like longitudinal studies of 10 years, the effects of social media on people for 10 years, to get some general conclusions that no matter what social network it is, this is what the effects of social networks are on people. This is what the effects of mobile phones are on posture and blood flow and happiness and, platelets and
right.
arthritis. And we kind of have none of that. Like, we need to have funding for general research, and we also need to have, short term. And I think some of the stuff coming out of the Civic Media Group at Media Lab is they're doing a really great job of algorithms for like race and gender and bias. And the research is going to be published in a bunch of different ways, journal articles, but also things that are fun and interesting and spreadable, spreadable media, so that people can be informed while they are being critical. So it's not just this super negative thing. It's like, okay, this stuff is going on. We're informed. Now we can do something.
Well, it sounds like you've actually done quite a bit of thinking with regards to this topic and in terms of the impact of technology on humans, on mobile phones, on humans and social networks. I mean, can you talk a little bit about like what your findings are and, what are some solutions that we can think about in terms of having healthier lives when it comes to trying to balance all of these, new technologies and continuous interruptions that we're dealing with on a regular basis?
I haven't done as much as I wanted to do, and I'm pretty disappointed in myself for not being able to communicate better to the general public. I really want to work on that, first off. And secondly, just even compiling research into one place and then citing it is more useful than, I guess, like one of the things is like the mere presence of a smartphone in the room reduces available memory, like reduces available cognition. Yeah, it's basically like a black hole of attention, and you will invariably get sucked into it. And so just because you know it's there or it's in your pocket, you are less likely to critically think or try to solve something on your own. You'll just grab it and like look something up. And that's disappointing. Another thing is like, I can look at people's social media profiles and be like, oh, they're using more black and white. Like that's been correlated with more depression, more selfies, more depression.
More selfies equals more depression?
Yeah, there's a bunch of research on that.
Wow.
Yeah, and so I knew one of my former employees was taking tons of selfies and lots of black and white photos, and I reached, "I'm
Wow.
sorry you're having a hard time. Can I come over and help?" And he was like, "Yeah, I'm having a really, really hard time." And I asked other people about it. I said, "What do you think about this guy?" And they said, "Well, look, he's working out and he looks really good, and he's working on his appearance. Like, I thought he had everything set up." And I was like, "There's no other people present in the picture." Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
there's a real thing where you're selling something. You can always tell the folks on Facebook that have broken up because all of a sudden they're out there, they're looking good, and it's selfie driven. You're right. It's funny.
Yeah. And so it's not that behavior has changed. You're just able to see it much more obviously, and the way that it shows up is really interesting. So, I try to do a thing where I wake up in the morning and I spend the first few hours I don't check any email. There's this thing called email apnea, which is an interesting thing to look into. Like Lisa Reichelt and others have been finding that when you read your email, you're actually holding your breath. So it's a kind of apnea. And you need to remember to take a deep breath because it's like all of these animals in a forest diametrically opposed to you and you freeze. And everything, whether it's useful or not, or a priority or not, is the same font size, the same urgency, and you just feel attacked. And the
So
other
true.
thing, it's a total mess. And what I've been trying to do is, and I want to do some research to look into this more, is that when you didn't have a phone and you just had letters and phones, when you would make plans to meet up with somebody, the way you would make plans was different, right? You'd say, okay, well, I'll meet you at 10, but in case you're not there, we'll meet at this spot, or we'll meet at this spot at, noon. Everybody'd go to the mall and they'd be like, okay, meet back here at noon. And then you'd wait around and everybody would meet around noon. And sometimes people would be like 15 minutes late and that was considered rude, but you'd all just kind of hang out until that time. And I think now with text messaging and how easy it is for us to communicate, it's not as appreciated as much, as in we get lazy about it because there's a convenience and everything is so easy and quick that, I'm just thinking about the people that, they don't cook anything. They just click on a button because they're so busy and they get a delivery service. And I say, well, do you not have time to cook? And they're like, no. And I'm like, but you're reading all these blogs about being efficient and you're trying to program more things efficiently. You're spending 80 hours of your week and sitting in front of a computer. Like if we went out and walked for a couple hours every single day, you would think about what you're going to program. You'd come back to your computer. You'd work on it as a tool instead of letting it consume you. You take far fewer crazy social media breaks where your psychology was like taken out of whack and you'd feel like miserable and depressed. And you'd be able to get something done, from a design focus. And there's also, I think, in the States, it's about this idea of working, and that like, you need to look busy and you need to be there. It's like, well, wait, people aren't getting more than maybe 2 or 3 hours work done a day if they're lucky, and 4 if you're really good. How many people actually work through the whole day? And then if you work at an office, there's gossip and there's a water cooler and there's a birthday party and a cake and that comes through. And if it's a large enough office, there's a birthday party every day. So it's not like you're going to actually be there fully focusing. But the people that I know who just take time for themselves in the morning and they do a 4-hour day, they do fine because they have control over their time and have control over their tools. And I think we've forgotten a lot as our computers have turned less of a tool and more of a consumptive device. And I think some of the research on rats is really useful. The idea of rats and a cocaine lover pressing the cocaine lever until they die, until they OD. That research was done later with rats with enriched environments. Originally, the rats had nothing in their cage. So, of course, they're going to press the button until they die. But rats that had families and friends and interesting activities would press it every once in a while or ignore it. And so this kind of makes me think that it's not the tech that's inherently bad. Our environments, our local environments around us have lost meaning and lost enrichment. And it's kind of the bowling alone type concept where like there's less things to do and that we have environments that, have less meaning and less goals and less long term. And those long term things like, learning how to woodwork or learning how to bake or like just having unstructured time in the evening with friends and family and allowing yourself to be bored or reading a book, like that slow time, what the Greeks would call Kairos time instead of this industrial Chronos time. We have less and less of this Kairos time. Even kids growing up, they're shuttled around from activity to activity without this, run out in the backyard and play until I scream at you to come home, and then, you'll eat dinner, and so we have these kind of lives where we have less and less of this. And so we've made an environment that makes it easy for technology to come in and demand our attention and time. And I think that's one of the big issues, is that, we've all become like those rats, that our environments are less and less enriched. So of course we're going to click on our phones and click on ads. I think of self-driving cars as the same way. What's the incentive for self-driving cars? Well, 30% more time for people to click on ads. That's great for everybody, right? It's a really cynical view, but it will, cars will become entertainment companies. Car companies will become entertainment companies because they'll have to provide environments that include, good connectivity, and, people will just be watching movies. It'll be like a persistent plane flight, and then people will get even less done. They'll be sitting around in these vehicles thinking they're being productive, when in reality they're losing meaning and they don't exactly know what they're doing. And I think we have to respect that we're human flesh bodies, and that we need to be okay with not being on all the time and not being perfectly productive, and be okay with that, and have a society that says it's okay for you to not answer your email after 5 p.m. like they do in France.
When we look at all of these things, these are a lot of the negative features that you get to learn as you study what it is to be a cyborg. What's the best about our cyborg selves that you see out there? What's exciting to you, and like, wow, this is a neat thing that we wouldn't have had possible 30 years ago?
I think it's great to be able to FaceTime my mom when she's not around. It's so nice to be able to see her face and talk to her. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, people were afraid of video calls because they're like, I don't look really perfect. And then the Numa guy came out on YouTube and made it totally okay for people to just sit there in their rooms and, not have makeup on and not look perfect. It's okay. You're just talking to somebody on the phone. It's okay that you see their face. It's okay that they don't look perfect. I've seen people, their grandmother's in Turkey and they're doing Thanksgiving dinner, and they put her at the head of the table and they eat dinner with her across the world. I've seen people, one of the schools that I went to it was in a very conservative city, and there were a lot of people who were gay and transgender, and they were terrified of being found out, but they could use technology to behind the scenes meet up with each other, communicate with each other safely, talk to each other, and eventually, use it to find the groups of people that they could communicate without, getting found out by their parents, until they were able to move to another city. And that was always aided by people in these technological groups. It's helped with, supply chains. Like, technology helps us feed a lot more people in the world than before. Research has improved and increased for all sorts of rare diseases, like the quantified self groups can start to take their own data and do, instead of surveillance to view from above, to view from below, surveillance to view their own selves and their data, and use it in this kind of symbiotic feedback loop to understand how to fix their problems and share it with other people. And there might be 5 people in the world with some ailment, but those 5 people can connect to each other online and actually feel like they're not alone, or something that doctors can't figure out. People have been able to diagnose what it is that's wrong with them because they found other people with these impossible symptoms. Some of the machine learning stuff is really great for detecting precancerous, skin samples. There's a guy in San Francisco that's doing 3Scan, which is a company that just takes tissue samples and takes a diamond knife and slices them from 3 dimensions to 2 dimensions, scans them in, and then puts them into a little machine learning network that can use doctor input and machine input to really predict early whether these things will become cancers or not. So I think the opportunity in the horizon is not machines taking over, but machines as they were before, living side by side alongside us and amplifying the best of what we can do as humans and doing what they do the best as machines. And this is kind of some of the concepts behind Calm Technology, which is the framework on how to make good technology that works with us instead of against us. How do we have smarter humans instead of smarter devices? How does something work even when it fails? Like an escalator turns into stairs when it breaks. Do our phones do that when they break? No, they turn into bricks. Like, how do we make things that work even under imperfect conditions? And this framework was created in the 80s and 90s at Xerox PARC, and then kind of went into obscurity. And I found it during my thesis work in college, and I got really excited about it and said, we have to bring this back. This is so well written and so clear, because we have a limit. You know, if you think of somebody in the military in the 1960s, like, I think that the information that we receive every day is the equivalent of what somebody would receive in the 1960s in the military. Like, it's an over proximity of information, and we're reaching our saturation point. Alarm fatigue, alert fatigue at hospitals is one of the leading causes of death, and, you know, medications that aren't getting delivered or administered in the right way, people having heart attacks but being ignored because doctors and nurses are desensitized because of alerts. I think we have too much. So what we can do is we can kind of say, how do we get things back into balance? We've gone way the other way. And how do we maybe, you know, Star Trek, like, sit next to our technology and have it give us just enough that we can make good decisions and inform us, but not overburden our attention. And that's really the big thing that I think we're going to deal with in the next decade, is how do we work out this relationship so that we have a positive, amplified world, and amplified compassion and amplified treatment methods. That's really what I care about. And, you know, I haven't done anything even close to being able to help people figure out these frameworks. Like, I'd love to be able to say, here's a framework for alerts at hospitals. You know, if I spend 10 years doing that and I can make something that's simple to implement in hospitals, that improves things and really get at the root of the problem, that saves, you know, 100,000 lives or something, or 2 million lives, like, I'll consider my work as a designer okay. If I make a talk that inspires somebody to dedicate 10 years of their life to do that, fantastic. But it's not going to be solved by yet another mobile app or the methods that we think are great right now. It's going to be solved by clever design, deeply understanding the boring aspects, the old stuff, respecting those old methods and blending them with the new, so that we can have the best of both worlds. And the patience and the funding to do that, and the shininess of that, is not there yet. But I hope that it will be in the future, because there's a lot to improve.
And is that what you're looking to address with comm technology? I mean, tell us a little bit about comm technology, or where you are now. What's the future hold for Amber Case?
The future for me is just learning how to write better. Mm-hmm. I'm writing a book on sound design, how sound affects us, and how we can make alerts that are less annoying. Because in comm technology, it was all about, there's too many alerts. How do we reduce the amount of alerts? Then with sound design, it's how do we improve the quality of those alerts? How do we improve the sonic quality of our environments so that we're less fatigued? And then the next book that I'm pitching right now is going to be a trade paperback, and it will be about, you know, just some of the things that we talked about, like how do we live well alongside technology? How do we work with it, you know, with our kids, with organizations, with families and communities? And so comm tech is kind of the initial lens onto this, you know, and the principles are really simple. It's technology should require the smallest amount of our attention. It can communicate, but it doesn't need to speak. We don't need all these disembodied voices telling us things that's not necessary. It can just be like a tiny light that tells us everything is okay. It should, you know, give us information, but create calm at the same time. Instead of having a disembodied voice tell you the weather report in your smart connected home in the morning, you can just have a light bulb that changes color based on what the weather's going to be. And you can feel what the weather can be, and then you can dress accordingly. And then if you want more information, you can look at your phone. Fine. You know, there's ways to consolidate information into tiny senses. And we did this really well with cars. You know, a car keeps your primary attention on the road, and everything in the car supports that attention. You know, you use your foot. What other piece of technology other than a sewing machine and the first mouse allowed you to use your foot to control something? We've forgotten all of these other senses that we can load with information so that we don't get distracted and take our primary focus away. You know, if you design for people first and you have enough people at the table from different demographics, then you can make successful technology. A lot of the human-centered design that came out of Xerox PARC, there were all sorts of weird people there. There were anthropologists and artists and programmers. There were people who were black and white and Hispanic. There were women. It wasn't just a monotonous blend of white people. It's really concerning for me right now to see a lot of people in San Francisco make the technology that's used by so many other people. On the one hand, it's very successful, but on the other, it's kind of flattening culture, assuming that everybody has very good Wi-Fi and the latest technology, and everybody's able-bodied and they can see at really small resolutions. Like, my eyesight isn't very good because I've spent way too much time on the computer, maybe. But testing the product and having, like, I would love my mom to be able to try and use some of these things and then have people take her seriously when she says, I can't read it, it's too small. How do you allow products to be changed by people to customize them to their lives? How do you make it so that the technology works really well on bad phones or in a subway when there's no connectivity? And that's kind of like, what's the minimum technology to solve the problem? Because technology will break, and then people are putting, AI and all these ideas on pedestals. But we saw that happen with VR and AR and AI in the 80s, and we saw it happen in the 60s, and we saw it happen in the 90s, and each one was followed by a bust, where there was these inflated marketing expectations that were, pushed aside as these inflated expectations were broken. And a lot of that comes from movies. We think that we can talk to a computer perfectly because in the movies we could, but that, you take 24 takes in a movie to get something perfectly. And, usually you can talk perfectly to Siri if you have the perfect American accent and you can enunciate really well and you don't have a slight lisp or anything, and there's no truck driving by that's interfering with the sound, and there's no kids screaming in the background, and you're not listening to music. I mean, how many issues do you have to have right before it can get your voice? That's why, like, the Alexa is fairly successful because it sits in your kitchen. You're not going to have too much sound happening. And yet even then people are yelling at Alexa to stop playing really loud music.
Right.
There's issues. So
right. There's actually a really hilarious article in Gizmodo that came out recently. It's called The House That Spied on Me. And it talks about a guy that, basically, put everything smart in his house, from Alexa to a smart coffee maker to the smart lights. And it's just, kind of talks about his, how it kind of turned into a living hell with all of these devices talking to each other, or he couldn't get the coffee maker to work and the Christmas lights would not go off, or, it was just such a funny example of, how we try to use technology to fix everything, but then, technology is quite not there yet. Or why do we need fixing when, like, the coffee maker works perfectly fine? Why does it need to be a smart coffee maker? Why do you need to be able to connect with it via your mobile device? I think it's definitely an interesting topic to think about. And how do we simplify? We don't need necessarily technology for everything, or maybe technology can help us, put down some of those or quiet some of those, constant alerts that we, constantly have going on. But yeah, it's just funny.
Yeah, that article was fantastic. It reminds me of, I started a company with a person, and we moved in together. We were engaged. We had a smart home. I mean, I grew up in a smart home. My dad made all sorts of smart home things. We went through a bunch of different iterations. I learned early that voice activated lights are a kind of mess. If you set the sensitivity up and then a truck drives by late at night and it turns on all the lights in your room, it's super obnoxious. But I think that, the other problem with it is that you've got, what happens when you sell your house? Do you move all the Hue light bulbs? You have to set up the networks. Like, what happens if more than one person comes over to your house and your Wi-Fi scale only has room for 2 people, and then it, like, records the wrong weight and you have no way to get rid of that? It's more of a first world problem. But the big one is that, we split up, and I just said, take all this smart home tech, take the other, but we had to split up all of our accounts. It was hilarious. It was kind of this, like, nightmare scenario. How do you split up a smart home? There should be like
the modern divorce.
what is it? Divorce mode. There should be that a service that just breaks up all your accounts on all your devices and unfollows and blocks each other on all the social media platforms.
Right, and untags you from every single picture that you have with that other person.
and when you have Time Hop or any of the other memories apps, doesn't include
Right.
the memories.
Exactly. Well, I mean, we're coming up on the hour, and this has been a super fascinating conversation. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to maybe just end with?
This is a weird thing to say, but I do all these things, but behind the scenes, I have major depression and anxiety. And
Wow.
when I ran my company, I had like a team of 20 people, 20, 25 people, and I had to hide it the whole time because I thought it was irresponsible and I thought I'd get fired if I had it. And I think a lot of people are dealing with anxiety and depression, and it's really easy on social media to make it look like you don't have it. But if you look at the gaps in when people post, like you can see it's like, oh, that's when they have it, and I don't know how to solve it. And I know it's going to become an enormous burden on people. And, I just want to share that maybe when people think like a lot of people will look at me online and be like, you've done all these things, but I don't feel like, and this is the depression talking, that I've accomplished anything or have done really anything in my life. And
Wow.
it
Thank you
sucks.
so much for sharing that, Amber. I mean, I think that's just so courageous of you to say. And, there are so many people that can relate to that. So I just want to, say thank you. I think that it's important for us to share our vulnerabilities because we are presenting such a farce, so to speak, in terms of, how we present ourselves, our other selves that we present in social media. So I think it is so important to, also share that we're humans.
Yeah.
I want to jump in and say something similar because, Sandra and I do a lot of incredible things, and I've got other shows, so I'm constantly meeting these incredible people like you, and I put these things up, and in an effort to not overshare, I don't even often share just the regular day-to-day things in my life, and I have PTSD, like severe, like I get, care for it all the time. And I do tend towards depression. And if I don't do my work, I get this impending feeling of doom all the time. But if you look at my social media presence, it's like, look at Pete's incredible life. And I'm very fortunate to be able to do this stuff. But you're right, there's this burden that I have to try to sort through. Yeah, I don't just empathize, I share those feelings with you
Well,
exactly.
thank you. I appreciate that. And I hope that, we have more candid talks about this in the future because a lot of what I do is, I hired some awesome photographer to make me look super epic, but it was really great way to hide my depression because most of the time, I'm in bed, like freaking out about the future and I've gotten plenty of help for it, but it's something I've dealt with and will deal with for the rest of my life. And it's in my family and my genetics. So yeah.
Yeah.
And
Same.
okay,
Yeah.
modern life really exacerbates that. So come to that later, but as a thing of like, anybody who's sitting there with depression right now and says, oh, wow, this person achieved all these things and has no issues, is like, no, no, no.
It's so true. And even if we don't have depression, we have tough times in our lives that we go through and are, feeling, having those feelings of sorrow or loss or whatever it may be. And you do feel alone or you do feel like you have to present this, perfect external view to the world. So I think it's super important. I think it would be great to actually have you on as a follow-up to just tackle that topic alone.
That would be amazing. And
Yeah, because
really,
you're not alone. There's so many people that are going through the same thing, and even if it's just for a time period in their lives, it is so important for us to talk about it and share and let people know that they're not alone. That we all go through tough times, and there are people that are regularly suffering.
thank you for that, and
Yeah,
thanks for wonderful questions, and I really appreciate being on the podcast. Thanks.
it's been so wonderful, Amber. Thank
Yeah.
you.
And for those who are interested in trying to get a hold of Amber and interact with her, she of course encourages that. And so you can find her on Twitter at Case Organic. That's a great place to start. Also her TED Talk. All you really have to do is search TED Talk and Amber Case, and you're going to see that. You're going to learn about cyborgs and how we're all cyborgs now. So definitely reach out because where she's at, what she's learning about, It's exciting, and I dig it. Make sure you hit Sandra and I. I'm at Pete A. Turner on Twitter, and always on there, always talking to people, so feel free.
Yes,
And
I'm at
Sandra,
Sandramp, SANDRAMP. Yeah, definitely. And thank you again, Amber. It's been such a wonderful conversation, and we look forward to having you on again.
Thanks so much. Have a wonderful day, and talk to you in the future.